What's up, guys, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy that you guys are tuned in with me this week for another crime commentary. Today we're going to be featuring Samuel Little. This is part 3, the last part of the series, unless you guys want me to cover some interesting details about Little. But other than that, I feel like I've kind of covered the whole case in its entirety. So we're just going to get into it. This last episode is going to be a lot of different victims that are going to be featured in the video. So it's going to be from Georgia, Louisiana, Vegas. And the reason that I did the video like that is because he had so many killings that were sporadic in those states. Whereas in Florida and LA, he had a lot more killings in there, in those states that were consistent. So that's why we're doing it like that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's get right to it. So basically, we're going to be focused on Louisiana. And the first victim that we're going to focus our attention on is Sarah Brown. It basically said that the age is unknown. They don't know how old she was, but this took place in 1973 in New Orleans, Louisiana. And Little remembered meeting her at a bar. He bought her a gold necklace, and he remembers driving off with her. He said that he killed her in a park-like area, which was near a river. So that's the information that was gathered. But from what I could find, based off research from a website called Audacity, is that basically Sarah worked at a restaurant, and this is where Little says that he met her. So this is the transcript. The FBI and New Orleans police need your help identifying this woman, which is a victim of serial killer Samuel Little from 1982. Fleeing a similar killing ground in Miami-Dade County, Florida. After his sixth murder, Little hit the road to New Orleans. Little says that he met a lady that he killed named Sarah who worked at a restaurant. New Orleans police have said that this matches the 1973 disappearance of Sarah Brown, which was an employee at Canal Street Restaurant, and she was last seen waiting for a bus. Though he's confessed to killing Brown, her remains have still been undiscovered. So then there is an investigator named Palazzolo, which is with the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, I guess, out there. And she talks about Sarah, and she says that they've matched it to the Jane Doe who was rediscovered in December of 1982. And she says that the description that Little gave matches the woman that was discovered because she was wearing a gold necklace at the time, and they just don't know who she is. So they were just saying, like, unfortunately, we don't know who she is still, which I find to be kind of weird if he's explaining to you, like, this is the woman, but maybe the information in terms of, like, her name and stuff were added in later once they, came to the conclusion that that's who she was. But I'm pretty sure, like, with the detailed descriptions that Little gave, as well as the pictures that he drew, which I've included a picture of what he drew of her as well in here, I feel like they should have been able to make that correlation a lot sooner. Another thing that kind of bothered me about this case is that Little was able to get away with stuff for so long. And I wonder, is that because many of his victims were Black women? With a lot of the crime shows that I watched, like, Criminal Minds and SVU, all these different shows, you see that a lot of times they're very smart. They have access to a lot of information. And so as time progressed on and them having the capability of DNA and stuff like that, I wonder why these victims were undiscovered for so long. Like, he was in his 80s, I think, when he died. So it's like, it's very unfortunate to see that a lot of these women, their murders could have been prohibited, or they could have been, in some way, they could have been helped to be found sooner. And so that kind of bothers me that a lot of the victims were Black. The victim that we're going to talk about is Dorothy Richards. And so Sarah Brown happened in 1973, but by 1982, Dorothy Richards was considered to be an unidentified victim. She was his 25th victim. So it said that he fled the town of Gray in Terrebonne Parish after killing Dorothy, and this took place in about October 1982. And that's when he slipped into New Orleans and ran into a woman that was a white female with blonde hair, blue eyes, between 34 to 44 years old, and he murdered her as well. But Dorothy Richards she took place in Houma, Louisiana. And she was 55 years old, and this happened in 1982, and that's pretty much all the information that they have on her. But the next victim, which is Daisy McGuire, they did their articles together because they are both from Houma, Louisiana. Goes by the name of Daisy McGuire. She was 40 years old, and this happened in 1996 in Houma, Louisiana. And so basically, there is a great deal of information about her. So just bear with me because there's a lot of information. So basically, Little killed McGuire. He basically beat her to death with a jack iron in her head. And about a week later, her corpse was found in the 900 block of Magnolia Street in Houma on February 6, 1996. So if we go back, there is some information in regards to Daisy McGuire's family and what they basically had to say. So McGuire's family says that knowing that he was, captured will allow them to start healing. And her brother said, I felt like, to me, sometimes I catch myself feeling guilty, like I wasn't there to protect her. And his name is Bobby McGuire. Little was already serving a life sentence in prison for 3 murders that took place in California, but he was long suspected in dozens of murders. So basically, the week that he was charged in Texas for a woman's death that happened there, the prosecutor says that he was able to provide them with details that gave them more information about 90 deaths that happened nationwide, dating all the way back to 1970. So Simmons says, if I would have ever thought I could have prevented this, believe you me, brother, I would lay down my life so that she could live. He says his faith and his siblings helped him to get past the dark days, but he said it hurt for a long time, and he thanks God that he saved him, because he really felt like he wanted to get even with Little. And so basically, him and his family said that they already had forgiven him. The only thing that they would like to still hear is an I'm sorry. He also goes on to say, if we kill him, that's not going to bring my sister back. That's not going to solve anything. So they're not really looking to see Little seek the death penalty, but really just take responsibility for what happened and really apologize for what happened. So the next victim goes by the name of Melissa Thomas, and she was 29 years old when this happened, and it took place in 1996 in Opelousas, Louisiana. And there's little to no information about Melissa other than what I was able to find, which was that Little strangled her to death and that her body was found in the Little Zion graveyard in the city of Opelousas. The next victim comes from Monroe, Louisiana, and there's not much information in regards to a name. So I have included a picture of what I was able to find off the FBI's website, and that's the picture that you're looking at right now. So Little stated that he killed a black female in Monroe, Louisiana, and this was sometime after 1987. He took a Greyhound bus into the town and stayed at a shelter downtown for 2 to 3 days. He stole meat from a supermarket in Monroe, and he sold it in the black neighborhood. The locals referred to this as the embankment. This area was across the street from a graveyard and near some railroad tracks. He described the black female as being 20 to 24 years old, and she was about 5'6" to 5'10". She weighed anywhere between 150 and 160, and she was a yellow or light complected color. So basically, he stated that the woman was a prostitute, and she worked for a madam that was named Mammy Way. He took the woman to a hotel where he signed her name on the hotel registry, and it was room either 8 or 9. The following day, he convinced the female to go with him into a wooden shack or a garage across the street from a McDonald's and just down from the graveyard that I talked about earlier. He stated that the garage was near a bus stop, and it was approximately 1 mile from the bus station that was located in the county on the outskirts of the town. The garage was locked, so he took the female and he made her crawl through the dog door just so that she could get inside. And inside the garage were paint supplies, ladders, and tools. And he stated that he strangled the woman to death and he left her body inside of the shed. And he said her body basically was left on the floor in between the garage and a bunch of ladders. And he basically, this next part is a little bit graphic, but he bit her. And that caused the woman to bleed a lot, he said. And so a day or two after he killed the woman, he saw yellow crime scene tape around the garage, and so he immediately left that town. And so on a later trip to Monroe, he noticed that the garage had been torn down and the area was now basically vacant. So They were basically in the process of tearing down a lot of the buildings, but the only thing that was still there was the McDonald's. So that's all that they had about the victim from Monroe. So this next victim took place in New Orleans, Louisiana. She was a black female, and Little stated that this happened approximately in 1982. It was possibly in the autumn, so that was the season that he met the female in New Orleans. He described the woman as 30 to 40 years old, 5'8" to 5'9" inches tall. She was about 160 pounds, and she was a honey-colored brown skin, medium-length straight hair. So the black female was wearing a pretty dress with buttons in the front, and he met the female in a club that she was attending, and basically she was at a birthday party with a friend. And so he described it basically as she was a small little Creole girl. And while at the club, he met the woman's sister and a lot of her friends. He remembered that while dancing with the woman, he saw her sister dancing with another man. The sister left the party with a man at the same time he, which being Little, left with the woman in his vehicle, which was a Lincoln Continental Mark III. The black female told Little that she lived with her mother, and her mom was basically sickly and possibly an invalid, which was the word that was used by Little. The woman also gave Little the keys to her house. So he drove the woman to the Little Woods exit, where he turned down a dirt road along a canal that was being dredged. They got out of the car, and then he pulled the woman towards the canal. There he held the woman's face down in the water, choking her while sitting on top of her back. Little left the woman's body there with her head in the water and her body on the water's edge. The black female was still wearing the dress, but it was pulled up. Immediately after killing the woman, he drove to a motel where he would stay in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and shortly after he realized that he still had the woman's keys. So he threw them on top of the motel that he was located off of the highway, which was Highway 90. That we're going to talk about is Georgia, and in this particular state, Little did have a lot of victims, so I'm going to get right into it. I'd say there's about 6 or 7 victims in Georgia, and then after this it becomes a little sporadic in terms of like one in Nevada, one maybe in Mississippi, so like it becomes sporadic, and not in Mississippi because we clearly just covered that, but we're definitely about to get into Georgia, so let's get to it. Which was going to be our first victim in Georgia, goes by the name of Leanne Helms. Her age was unknown, and this happened in about 1977 in Fulton County, Georgia. Helms lived and worked in downtown Atlanta, and allegedly Little met her at a club, and basically her body was found by a Department of Transportation worker. He said that it was June 27, 1977, and the Fulton County Police Department responded to a person down. This was a call on Ockley Road and Ockley Industrial Boulevard across from Jeannie Evans Ford. When police arrived, they were met by a 911 caller, which was a Department of Transportation worker who found the body in the woods. 3 days later, the cause of death was determined to be strangulation, but they did not know who killed the woman. And so that's all that we really know about Leanne Helms. However, this same exact article was able to shed a little bit more light as well on another victim by the name of Patricia Parker, which was located out of Dade County, and this happened in 1981. So Tracy Casey, which was an Atlanta homicide detective, she asked them to look for a homicide involving a white female that had been strangled and dumped on the side of the road. And she went on to say that she was working with Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the Department of Justice on a serial killer by the name of Samuel Little. And so Leanne Helms' case had stayed quiet for years because they had no idea who her killer was, and that was merely because they weren't able to put the pieces together. Because like you can see from many of the videos, if you stay tuned for this part 3, then you've watched all 3 of them, then you kind of know that Little evaded the police for a very long time. And that is why some of these murders, they just went unsolved, because he had to kind of pretty much say it himself in order for them to figure out he was the one who committed the crime. That we're going to talk about goes by the name of Patricia Parker, and they were a little bit unsure about her age, so they listed her between 25 to 30 years old, and this took place in 1981 in Dade County, Georgia. So Little confessed to murdering her, and in addition to murdering her, he also confessed to murdering 4 other women in the Georgia-Tennessee area. So forensic reconstruction of her skull, as well as DNA samples, confirmed that she indeed was one of his victims and that Little was telling the truth. So the Georgia Bureau of Investigation announced that they had identified the remains, and it was said that the remains that were identified were of a 30-year-old woman. So they identified her later as Patricia Parker. The GBI said the remains were found back on September 28, 1981, but they were never able to identify them until now. Since 1981, the GBI said it had maintained an open investigation into the remains, but over the years the case grew cold until about 2 years after Little confessed. So in 2018, the Georgia-born serial killer Samuel Little, self-described as the most prolific serial killer ever, gave the Texas Ranger information about a murder of a young black woman he committed in Chattanooga in early 1980s. And that's what really led to the discovery of Patricia Parker, as well as the other 4 victims that ultimately lost their life to Little. Victim was listed as a Jane Doe. She was a woman in her 20s, and this took place in 1982 in Dade County, Georgia. Little confessed to killing Doe after meeting her at a nightclub on the 9th Street in Chattanooga, and after facial reconstruction based on Doe's skull, her family was able to identify her, thus confirming Little's claims that there's not much but other than that, there's not much information regarding the Jane Doe. So even though they were able to reconstruct her face and the family was able to identify her, her name, for some reason, was not linked to where I could actually find who she was. So she was just listed as a Jane Doe. Victim that we're going to be talking about goes by the name of Fredonia Smith, and she was 18 years old when this happened to her, and this took place in 1982 in Macon, Georgia. Her skeletal remains were found in the backyard of a Magnolia Street home by the owners who had just moved in. So her brother, Eddie Smith, said that for more than 35 years he was left wondering who was responsible for his sister's death, and that basically he had some cruel words for Little, and basically he just said that if he could, he would put his hands around his neck and squeeze his neck and let him see how it felt. And so he also questioned, like, how was he able to do this to all of these women? So on Friday afternoon back in 2018, Bibbs County Sheriff's Office announced that they had convicted Samuel Little, who did admit to strangling and killing Fredonia Smith on August 19th in 1982. This took place near Washington Park in Macon, Georgia, and the case basically said that they found the body strangled to death in the backyard of the home, which we already talked about. But the homeowners became aware of this because 2 weeks after purchasing the home, they decided to go clean an overgrown area, and that is where they discovered the body at. So in 2018, around the time where this was discovered, Eddie Smith said he received a phone call from Bibbs investigators that he'd been waiting for a long time. And basically, he described them telling him that they wanted to talk to him about his sister and that they basically found the guy who did it. And he said the only words that he could say were, "Thank you, Jesus." So it's really unfortunate that this took place. She was a young girl that had her whole life ahead of her. And this is not to discount any of the other victims because they all had their whole life ahead of them and none of them deserve for this to happen. It's just extremely disheartening because it reminds me of like my younger sister because she's so young. And it's like, you know, he had no business doing this to any of the women. But one thing that was a little bit different than most of the patterns that I've observed from him is that she wasn't found in a bar or picked up in any area like that. We're kind of unsure of how he even happened upon her. And so it just makes you wonder, like, was she walking and he offered her a ride and she met her untimely death? Like, you know, it's just extremely unfortunate. And she was approximately 23 years old. This took place in 1984 in Savannah, Georgia. So she met him at a bar. They ended up driving off where she was strangled and raped. And then her body was dumped in a construction site, like a construction area off of Tremont Road. So when News 3 spoke with her family, Diane Williams, which was Campbell's sister, said that she never thought this day would come. Because she's like, you know, there's people out there and they're only focused on the fact that there are more than one victim. So she never thought it would come to where they would actually find her sister. Her sister went missing and was not found for a full year, but then they later discovered her body at the construction site, and it was built. This is where Interstate 5116 or 5516 was like basically being built at the time. And so that is where she was strangled. And basically, in quotation, Little had stated that he left the woman in the 80s after he strangled her on a pile of construction material. So that county's district attorney, Meg Heap, said that basically they found that information and were able to send a picture, and Little confirmed that yes, that was her, and he did do that. So did not have a name listed for her. She was just listed as Savannah, Georgia, black female. So this took place in 1974, and while driving his white Thunderbird, Little said he killed a 19 to 23-year-old black female in Savannah, Georgia. He described her as standing approximately 5'5" and weighing between 140 to 150 pounds. She was thick and big-thighed with a dark complexion and a pretty face. Little believed the black woman was originally from Savannah and that she may have had some mental problems. He met the female at a restaurant in Savannah, and she basically brought him to her house in a black neighborhood near the Salvation Army, where she lived with a 40-year-old female that chewed snuff, which was dipped tobacco. The woman lived in the upstairs of the two-story residence, and Little spent the night there with her. The black female showed Little pictures of herself and another man near a pier on a boat. The next day, Little drove the woman to a park with a parking lot. He referred to the area as an island with roads on both sides. He stated that he had sex with the woman and choked her in his vehicle. He also stated that she was dazed, but she did not die. So then he walked the naked woman into the park grassy area and choked her while she was standing up. The female became dizzy and fell to the ground. He stated that smoke was coming off the woman's body. He immediately left and drove around the park. When he returned to where the woman's body was, there was a red car there, possibly a police vehicle, and he stated that he wasn't sure whether he killed the woman, but the black female called him Kane or Kane. So Little thought the black female's name was Catherine, Cat, or Jane, and that Little may have bitten the black female. What is super crazy and strange about this particular case is that he wasn't sure if he actually had killed her. He had to leave because I think he probably got freaked out by her body smoking, because I'm wondering like what would have caused her body to start like expelling smoke. And then for him to discover that she also was being discovered by somebody when he looped around to see, what was going on. It didn't allow him to finish what he had started originally. I think what also was really strange is that I don't think in any of the videos that I've done on Samuel Little that he's bitten any of his victims. So the fact that he did bite her, and he has had so many arrests. Like when you look at the pictures that I posted in video 2 and video 1, you can see that he has a long rap sheet. So in 1974, they should have been able to identify his bite marks and linked it with the DNA that they had in their own system. And I know in their defense, they didn't have that great of a system at the time, but it's just crazy that he is the one that had to end up confessing that they never were able to catch him on their own merit and tie all of these things together. Victim is a no name, and this took place in Atlanta, Georgia. She was a black female, and this happened in 1981. He stated that he killed a woman in Atlanta, and he described the woman as a black female with mahogany skin, the color of leather. The black female was in her late 20s to late 30s, and she stood about 5'6" or 5'9". She weighed between 130 to 160 pounds, and she wore shorts that were made like a dress. Little danced with the woman in a bar on Auburn Avenue, and he believed that the black female was having problems with her boyfriend that night. So she agreed to leave with Little, but she did not want anyone to see them leave together, which that is extremely unfortunate, because if anybody knows anything, someone may have been able to say to the police, like, hey, the last time we seen her was with Little, with this guy, and at least be able to describe him. But because she didn't want anybody to see them leaving, that kind of was a fatal mistake. So he said that they basically ended up going out to his vehicle. and it was a 1967 Lincoln Mark III, I'm guessing. And a few minutes later, the black female came over to his car and sat on the front right fender and began to cry. She eventually got in the car, and after she looked around to make sure nobody saw her get in, she laid down so that no one would see her leaving with him. She directed Little to Interstate 75, and they headed south into the country, south out of the county. And so he basically said that he didn't think that they would drive far before he exited the highway onto the side of the street under construction. So he described the road as wide but lonesome, and there wasn't no houses or nothing but trees on the road right off the highway. And those were Little's words. He followed the road until it dead ended, and then he parked in the area of the woods that were basically accessible on both sides of the woods. Or both sides of the roads. He stated that he choked the woman and that she defecated all over herself and in his vehicle, which is another sign of evidence. So I wonder, like, he had to have cleaned the car out somewhere, and like, it just doesn't make sense that he was able to evade the police so long. It just kind of shows that they were very sloppy. And it goes to show that a lot of different county police officers or police departments do not share information with others. And had they been doing that at this time, he probably wouldn't have been a serial killer because they would have been able to catch him a lot sooner. He said that he strangled the black female and then carried her body across the street, and he laid her in some grass that was about 10 feet into the woods. He left the black female with her clothes on, and her eyes were closed like she was sleeping. He then went back to his hotel and utilized a bucket full of soapy water to clean off his seats. Okay, so that's where he cleaned up. But the manager of the hotel, who was wearing an Atlanta Falcons hat, approached him and asked him what he was doing. So that's a witness. And had they been a little bit more diligent and paying attention, they might have been able to catch him. And so he stated that he thought that he got disinfected from the hotel manager. So he just told him, like, oh, I thought that I got disinfected from you, so I'm cleaning my car out. And so that's how he was able to kind of get the manager out of his face. Last case in Georgia, and then we're going to be headed over to Mississippi, is another no-named victim, which took place in Atlanta, Georgia in 1984, and she also was a black female. So we know he has a type, and he rarely derailed from his normal type. However, I do see a couple of Caucasian victims, so you could tell that he did, even though he had a type, he sometimes would kind of choose a different victim of a different ethnicity. However, he tended to stick with black females. So he basically was driving a green station wagon, and he said he killed a woman in Atlanta, Georgia. He said the black female was about 22 to 25. She was slim and tall. She was about 5'9", and she weighed between 120 to 130 pounds. He met the female at a quiet bar on the corner of Auburn Street in Atlanta. So this is another time where Auburn Street is somewhere where he's mentioned meeting a victim. So we also know he has a pattern of frequenting the same places to pick up victims. He remembered that when he entered the bar, she was sitting in a booth, and he thought the woman told him that she went to college and she was angry because something had happened in her college. He later went through her wallet and found her college ID, which he believed it was from Morehouse College, which is weird because, Morehouse, maybe back then it was a dual college, but I think now it's all men. But he made a date with the woman, and then they left the bar and drove together on a highway that he described to be way out. He said that he exited onto a dirt road surrounded by canals, and he strangled the woman in his car, but then his vehicle would not start. So he stated that a white boy in a hot rod gave him a jump start. So ding, 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 another victim where there was a witness to him being at the scene of the crime, and that person for some reason probably didn't watch the news or never put the pieces together, but never came forward so that they could link that to Little. Because if your car wasn't starting, that literally placed you at the scene of the crime when you were getting your car jumped. So basically, he said he drove the long way down a side road next to the main highway, and the road led into the woods adjacent to the canal, which was barely big enough for two cars to get by. There were no houses in the area, and he placed the woman's body in the canal, and he thought she fell into the water. He stated it wasn't like she was floating down the river. She hung up on something down there, and they probably seen her the next day. He believed the black female was still wearing a dress, and that her body was like with her body, was a boxy purse that he also threw into the water with her. So what is even more strange is that when this guy in the hot rod gave him the jump start, that woman was in the car dead and he had no idea. So that's even worse. Like, not only, I'm thinking that he left the scene of the crime with the body exposed, but he didn't. He actually had her in the vehicle while this guy was giving her a jump, or giving him a jump, which is crazy. So next we're going to move to Mississippi, and we're going to talk about Samuel Little's victims that were there. We're headed over to Mississippi, and the victims that we're going to be focusing on for Mississippi are a total of 5 victims. So we're going to dig into each of their stories and get to know them a little bit more and what happened which caused their demise. We are starting off with our first victim, which was Julia Critchfield. She was 36 years old. This took place in 1978 in Harrison County, Mississippi. So she was strangled, and he threw her body off of a cliff into a dirt pit. Her autopsy revealed that she had died about 2 hours before being disposed of by her killer. There was not much information that I could find about Julia other than a Facebook page named The Fall Line Podcast, which did state that Julia Critchfield was a mother, and she was described as a very private woman by her friends. Though it's very unclear how she met Little, the two crossed paths on the evening of January 21st, 1978 in Gulfport, Mississippi, and her body would only be discovered the next day in Saucier. Our next 2 victims were very good friends, and they met their untimely end together at 2 separate times in the day. The first is Alice Taylor, and then her friend Tracy Johnson. This took place in 1992 in Mississippi. So based off an article that I was able to find with WLOX, it stated that authorities say that Alice Taylor's body was found on December 11th, 1992 under a pile of tires on the side of the road between Mississippi Ave and Alabama Avenue. An autopsy showed that she had been strangled, and at the time, police were also investigating the disappearance of her friend, Tracy Johnson. And they were both seen with each other the day that their bodies were found. So on the day actually before the bodies were discovered. He confessed to killing both Tracy and Johnson on the same day, but at different times. 3 weeks later, Tracy's body was found on a dirt road off of Highway 49 in Saucier, and she had been strangled as well. And at the time, the investigators believed that the 2 friends were killed by the same person, possibly at the same time, but basically all their leads ended up drying up, and the case eventually went cold. So in October, Harrison County investigators were contacted by the Texas Rangers after Little had reportedly confessed, and the authorities said that Little admitted to killing Critchfield at the time and also said that he had killed 2 women on the same day in the 90s. He also told investigators that the women were together when he met them in North Gulfport, but he said that he picked them both up at the same time, but ended up killing them at different times. And so he also disposed of their bodies separately as well. And this is just super unfortunate. A lot of times as women, we feel like, hey, if I've got my homegirl with me, nothing can really happen to me. Hey, if we get a ride from this random person, they're not going to be able to do anything because there's more of us than there is of them. But it just goes to show that all it takes is for you to be comfortable with somebody, and then for them to get you isolated, and that it can also sometimes be an untimely end, if you're not careful, because we just never know what people's intentions are. And we do live in a world where there are bad people, and then there are people who are kind of naive and may not be aware as much because they don't think people are like that. But I'm here to tell you, there are some crazies in this world, and as the world turns, it seems that the more people are getting crazier and crazier by the day. So we definitely don't live in times where you can trust somebody that you meet, because people don't always show you who they are. You can know a person for 10 years and not find out that they're psycho until 10 years later. And you're like, well, I thought I knew this person. And so you realize you only knew their representative. And so at times, It's just unfortunate because as women, I do know with my friends, we will go to the club together and I might feel more comfortable because I know my homegirls with me. But that doesn't always mean that you're safe. That we're going to talk about is Nancy Carol Stevens. She was 46 years old in Tupelo, Mississippi, and this took place in 2005. He stated that he started a friendship with her, and it led to her strangulation in a Walmart parking lot when they were traveling together in his RV. He explained that he strangled her inside the RV before dumping her body on the side of the road. He then disposed of her corpse, like I just said, on the side of the road. And Stevens was basically from Decatur, Alabama. Her case went cold until Little confessed to killing her in 2018, along with a string of other women. He mentioned that he liked Stevens, and in many interviews, like they were cool. He was getting to know her. He really enjoyed her company, but he says something seemed to be off because something set him off with her. She did something and it bothered him enough to where he decided, like, hey, I'm going to kill her. He said that they ended up hanging out for about 2 weeks. And so that's what's different about this victim and a lot of the other victims. A lot of the other victims, they didn't even get that type of a chance, to get away from him, because 2 weeks is a long time. But yeah, so he interacted with her for about 2 weeks, and that ended up eventually leading to her demise because she did something to set him off, and that was his excuse for killing her. So the last victim that we're going to talk about is located in Gulfport, Mississippi. She was a Black female, and this happened approximately between 1980 to 1984, and Little possibly said it could have happened in the 70s. He said he was driving a black Thunderbird and he killed a pretty dark-skinned girl in Gulfport, Mississippi. He described the black female as approximately 22 to 25 years old, and she was short but wide with pretty legs and a pretty body. She stood about 5'3" to 5'5" tall, and she weighed about 120 to 130 pounds. He said that she was very soft-spoken and sophisticated, clean and intelligent-looking with a beautiful personality. He met the woman at a bar in the Black Projects area, and it was basically located in Turkey Creek, and it was 2 blocks away from Highway 49. And so if we know anything, we know that Little likes to stay close to highways. He likes to stay in bars, and he frequents areas where he knows that Black women are going to feel comfortable with him. So he said he parked outside the bar, and the female approached him, and she asked could she get in his car. And he believed that she had been in an argument with her boyfriend because she was pretty angry. The female asked could he take her to get something to eat, so he drove her to a restaurant off of Highway 49, and he bought her some dinner. Afterwards, he drove the woman on a pass, like basically a road towards Biloxi. And then he got to Jitney Jungle Supermarket, and he turned right, headed towards the ocean and away from the ghetto. He described driving a few blocks towards a black settlement, and he said he came to an isolated area and he parked, and basically the grass was cut low and it was good. So that was the area where he ended up strangling her. He strangled the woman in his vehicle and pulled her out of his car and dragged her body onto the island of the grass that was encased in concrete. Little said the woman carried a butcher knife, and so that fell out of his car. So he put the knife point down in the ground next to her body and pushed the handle into the ground until it disappeared. He believed that he left the woman clothed in a skirt and a blouse. So this video has taken me almost 2 weeks to record. That is due to so much of a hectic schedule, a new baby, just everything. So I originally had planned on making this video, including Ohio, Vegas, and those victims. However, we are already at the 38-minute mark, and I'm not really feeling like, when I make longer videos, it seems like I don't get as many views. I'm trying to stay consistent, but it can be a little bit discouraging. So in order for me to keep you guys entertained and liking what I'm doing, I'm definitely going to cut it off at the 40-minute mark. And so, unexpectedly, we're going to have a part 4 with Samuel Little. But in order to close off this video, I'm just going to end it here. My condolences to the families of the victims that have lost their life. Stay tuned for next week's part 4. That will officially be the last part, because those victims, it's like 1 in Ohio, I think 2 in Vegas. And so the victims in the states that I'll be talking about will be maybe 1 or 2 victims per state, and there's not many states left to go through. So we're just going to knock those out in part 4 next week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, guys. It really, really is helpful to me when you like the video, because it lets me know you're enjoying the content. And when you subscribe, I'm trying to get to 200 subscribers. I'm at 110, so I am 90 away from my goal. So 90 more people, hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.